I spend a lot of time reviewing and editing query letters for authors who are on the hunt for a literary agent. So today I wanted to do a deep dive into one really important element of the query letter, and that is the comparable titles. I often see comparable titles in query letters that really just aren't an appropriate fit, or sometimes the comparable titles are completely left out. And both of those scenarios can put you at a disadvantage because having good comp titles in your query letter can help you stand out in an agent submission inbox. So today I'm going to give you a complete overview of what comparable titles are, why they're important, how to choose comparable titles, what makes a good one, as well as how to go about actually finding comparable titles for your book. Having poor comp titles is actually one of the biggest mistakes that I see in query letters, which I go over in another video. So check that out to look at my other two biggest mistakes and make sure you're not making those as well. And if you are anywhere along the book writing or publishing journey, I recommend subscribing to my channel. My background is I used to work at a literary agency as well as Random House in New York City, and I used that working experience to give aspiring authors tips on how to strengthen their manuscripts and pursue traditional publishing. So if that interests you, I'd love to have you around. So let's start by talking about what is a comparable title to begin with. These are books that you identify in your query letter as similar to the project that you are working on and presenting to the agent. That means they could be similar in content, similar in style, and would appeal to the same audience. They are likely also in an adjacent or the same genre. Now, I recommend having 2 or 3 comparable titles in your query letter. Having one just isn't quite enough, and having more than 3 just runs the risk of confusing the agent and also making it seem like you're not clear on what your vision is for your story. Some writers will use comparable authors instead of specific comp titles to say that their work is similar to that author's work. However, I really do recommend narrowing in on specific book titles because, as we know, writers can have multiple different styles, they can even write in different genres, so just comparing yourself to an author at large isn't quite specific enough. Next, I want to talk about why comparable titles are so important to begin with. The first point is that they help to give the agent a sense of the flavor of your book in a way that just the genre classification doesn't. So for example, Wolf Hall and A Gentleman in Moscow are both considered historical fiction. However, they have very different styles and appeal to very different readers. So explaining that your book is like Wolf Hall or like A Gentleman in Moscow actually gives the agent a much more specific sense of what your novel is like than just saying it's historical fiction. Secondly, having some good comp titles in your query letter shows the agent that you have a sense of what the contemporary publishing landscape looks like and what types of books are being put out today. And third, editors at publishing houses actually have to put together comparable titles before making a book deal offer to a literary agent. So if an agent comes to them with a submission that they are interested in and they want to make an offer to publish that book, that editor actually has to find comparable titles, usually published in the last few years, that they think aligns with the submission that they want to offer on. And what they're going to do is use the sales of those comparable titles to then put in a profit and loss statement and calculate how much money they can offer you for your book according to what they think it will sell based on what the comparable titles have sold. So they'll make an estimate on how many copies it's going to sell, calculate out what that would be in revenue for the publishing house, and then make you a book deal offer based on that. So there actually is a business and financial underpinning to the comp titles that is important to understand. And having all of that thought process already started with the query letter is really impressive to the agent and really just helps them sell your book that much easier. So when you're looking for comp titles, what are the qualities that you should be looking for? Because there are millions of books out there. How do you select the ones that actually would make for a good comp title? This is really important to nail because if you have bad comp titles, that actually is going to be a detriment to your query letter so you want to make sure you get it right or don't include them at all. But I really think that everyone can include great comp titles, so I would encourage you to try. What to look out for is, one, they should be recently published. Now, I would put the limit at 5 to 10 years because you really want the comparable titles to reflect the current book market. It really isn't relevant to reference something that's been published 20, 30, 40 years ago because that's not reflective of what readers are gravitating toward today. Secondly, you want the comparable titles to have successfully sold because ultimately you are saying that your book is going to appeal to the same readership as these books, which means you want to show that there actually is an appetite for this type of book and that it ultimately will sell well. This part is really, really tricky because you want to avoid outlier bestsellers like Harry Potter and Gone Girl because the agent is going to see that as an unrealistic comparable title because they are understood to be, all-time best-selling books, and it's just not likely that your book is going to reach that level, and that's totally fine. The agent isn't going to knock you for not being the next Gone Girl, the next Harry Potter, so they just want to see that you are coming up with realistic comp titles that have sold well, but don't go for very top of the list. So you can get a sense of if the book has had healthy sales based on the number of Goodreads and the number of Amazon reviews. That's a pretty easy way for a layperson without any access to publishing databases to get a sense of how much they've sold. I would look for books that have had over 1,000 reviews on either platform. That's a really good indication that they've sold pretty well. The last element to consider here is that I recommend choosing comparable titles that have been traditionally published over indie or self-publishing. And that is simply because your agent is going to try to sell your book to one of the big 5 publishing houses, so it just makes the most sense for you to compare your book to a traditionally published book. That said, I would say one exception would be if it is a breakout indie or self-publishing bestseller and it's really well known and really well respected and it just really perfectly aligns as a comp title for yours. That's probably okay to include because the agent would probably be familiar with that book since it sold so well. But in general, try to err toward books that have been traditionally published. So the tough part here will be, how do I determine if a book has been traditionally published or self-published? Because the lines are getting more and more blurred these days, and online it can be very tough to tell. So what you're going to do is, if you're on the Amazon book page, you are either going to click the Look Inside preview function and then scroll to the copyright page, which is usually included as one of the preview pages, and check the publishing house and imprint that is stated there. Or on the actual Amazon description page, you can scroll down to all the details about the book and the publisher will be listed. Now, because the big 5 publishing houses have hundreds of imprints within them, you're likely not going to necessarily recognize if it's an imprint of a publishing house or a smaller indie or self-publishing platform. So you're going to Google the name of that house or that imprint that you see listed, and then you'll be able to figure out that way if it is part of a major publishing house or not. So finally, where do you look for comparable titles? I have a few suggestions here. The first is to browse Goodreads. I really like Goodreads list function. So, anyone as part of the community can make a list of similar books that fit a certain category or classification. So I found one that is called Medicine and Literature, for example. So if your book is about a doctor, has a medicine element to it, then going into a list like that would be super helpful. And then you can go from there and narrow down which books you think are good matches for yours. Secondly, Amazon is a great place to look just because it is the biggest repository of books across all imprints, all publishing houses. So you'll be able to find anything on Amazon. And Amazon has a very robust genre classification and sub-classification list. So you can really narrow down the categories and figure out what might be a good match for you. It's also pretty easy to tell if a book is a bestseller on Amazon because it will be listed and they have the ranking system. So you can kind of get a sense of a book's popularity that way, which is really helpful for the comp titles. Third, if you have enlisted beta readers or a professional editor, it doesn't hurt to ask them if the manuscript reminded them of any books that they've read or any books that they have heard about in the marketplace. And then lastly, I recommend doing your own reading in the genre a little bit, because that'll only help you improve the quality of your writing and better understand the publishing market. So definitely make it a homework project to try to read some of the most popular books in your given genre. I hope this video helped you understand the importance of the comparable titles in your query letter, as well as gave you some practical tips on how to go about finding them and what to look for. Let me know in the comments below if there's anything else about comparable titles that I didn't cover in this video that you would like to learn more about. I would love to make sure to cover that in a future video. And if you're looking for some more tips on strengthening your query letter, check out my video on the top 5 elements of a successful query letter, where I break down everything that you need to ensure your query letter is polished. And as always, if you like this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to my channel. It would mean a lot to me, and I am just so grateful for the community that we've built. Thanks so much for watching, and happy writing.